And they have one story dominating.
Yeah, they have one story. It's the Queen's lady in waiting, an 83-year-old palace aide who said, "Where are you from?" to a black guest at the palace, which is the worst and most horrific thing that anybody's ever done. I mean, how deep should we bury this woman? She's already been forced to quit her job.
Not enough.
It's not enough. It's not enough. Like,
we should burn effigies.
Can we string her up by piano wire? Is that too much?
I mean, she's dragged up the length of the mall. I think that was the original punishment, wasn't it, for some sort of racial indiscretion?
Right.
Ankles to the back of the jag
stocks.
and just hauled up the mall to the Admiralty Arch.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
That's why the road is pink.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so you can wash off the bloodstains afterwards.
Right,
yeah.
OK. I mean, she said, she asked a charity worker, the boss of a charity, "Where are you from?" She's been forced to quit. Prince William, or King William, whatever he's called now, has come out and condemned her, said that she's unacceptable. But what's interesting is, so, you know, she said, "Where are you from?" to this woman who's born in London, and raised in London, so, you know, is British. And obviously it's, you know, it's unpleasant. It must be unpleasant being, you know, asked where you're from. I get asked where I'm from quite a lot. I'm from Scotland, in case anybody wants to know. But
and that's even when you're not wearing traditional ceremonial Scottish dress.
yeah. But this woman, Ngozi Fulani, she felt violated, but she runs a charity called Sister Space that caters for women of African and Caribbean heritage.
Yes.
So how does she cater for those women without asking them where they're from? You've got to validate where they're from.
She can have no possible knowledge, understanding or conception of what it is to have African or Caribbean heritage. Clearly, she has no grasp of those issues.
Yeah, I mean, some people would say that this is just an elderly woman showing an interest in someone and showing an interest in their history and their heritage, as you know, as you do a lot of times.
And those people would be racist.
Those people are awful.
And there are two things which I think you found in there anyway, but in our briefing notes, there was one that she was apparently dressed in full, very obviously traditional Caribbean stroke African regalia, very beautiful big headdress, floral dress and so on. So
like
obviously
coming to America gear.
Yeah, and then also there is a description of how when she discovered African dancing, she said her life changed when she joined an African dance group as a teenager. To hear Africans with strong accents learn about the food and the drumming touched my heart, took me to a place I'd never been. All of which is fine, but suggests she does feel some sort of connection to somewhere she's from, as it were, in some sense other than purely...
And the charity she runs is about women, helping women with a connection with that heritage, with that history. So, you know, to then say that asking about that heritage and history is some sort of vicious Nazi hate crime, it just seems like a nonsense to me. But maybe I'm just a terrible person.
Well, that's separate, but also both things can be true at once. I mean, look, firstly, it's a shock to me that anyone at Buckingham Palace is out of touch. And I'm surprised this even happened. Look,
they should watch The Crown.
Exactly.
They would get back in touch there.
They'd learn about themselves.
With the 1980s, at least.
They'd learn about things they didn't do. It's obviously potentially rude and offensive to keep asking where someone's from. Who knows what the intention was? Is it a resigning issue? I question that. The Sun had quite... It was called prolonged...
I mean, being 83 might be a resigning
issue. That's also...
issue.
Well, perhaps. There was prolonged... It was called prolonged racism, which I found a weird phrase. But the Sun had an even better phrase in their version of the article. The person here was quoted, the lady was quoted, perhaps incorrectly, as saying, the fact that it was done just in the open, in front of people, on a day when we should be working towards violence against women. And it detracted from that good cause, Simon, and that's my big problem with it.
Freudian slip. She is on record as saying herself, Ms. Fulani, that she believes Meghan was subject to domestic violence when she was in the royal family and so on.
Right.
She has kind of got history of believing that the royal family is deeply, fundamentally racist.
Well, and I guess when you look at things, you can see what you want to see. If somebody asks you a question, you can project whatever you want onto that question.
Yeah. I used to get asked all the time, briefly, I've spent a year sort of gap year, but a bit later in my mid-20s. When I came back, everyone was convinced I was Australian. And I had a bit of a tan, and I picked up the accent, I guess, a little bit, you know?
Where are you really from? You like kangaroos? They're good at cricket?
And if I said no, they would always go for South African, which I like that. I kind of...
That was more your views.
Yeah, I like to LARP as a South African, because you're a bit scary. Anyway, I think that's as much as we need to get out of the Daily Mail. You got the Telegraph's front page, Nick.
Yes. Strikes on every day until Christmas is their main story. So some nice depressing news before Christmas.
Yeah.
Walkouts to disrupt trains, post buses, driving tests and cash handling. Didn't see the last one coming. I mean, it says rail workers, teachers, security guards, driving examiners and rural payments officers. I'm like, two rural payments officers? You know, that's when you know it's a really bad strike. I didn't even really know what that was.
Is it like an old post office lady with the...
Still don't know. Only just got given the story. No idea. But it's very important. Yeah, and they've yet to confirm dates whether it will definitely happen, but they're going to have to give 2 weeks' notice. But it's not good. And, of course, people are defaulting to their normal position. Sunak is criticising Starmer, saying it's his union paymasters, while Simon Clarke, Tory MP, is saying, you know, what about the self-defeating inflationary spiral, which is the obvious flaw, the wage price spiral thing. And he's saying that if the unions don't come to their senses, the government will have to push ahead with minimum service legislation, which France and Spain do have, whereby you have to keep some minimum service going. Right. We all know, like particularly the tube strikes, London just grinds to a halt. It's an absolute mayhem. So I think something like that would be reasonable. But
if we're talking about the country grinding to a halt, if driving instructors go on strike, that'll actually free up traffic. It'll be easier to get where you're going. You won't be stuck behind some 17-year-old doing 12 miles an hour.
Yes. In the short term, that would be possibly one of the most beneficial. That could boost productivity.
I can't believe people haven't thought of it before.
But rural payment offices will be hell without the rural payment officers.
Do you think they'd be offset by Just Stop Oil protesters as well? Possibly. I think we're coming up to them a bit later, aren't we? Have we got anything else on the front page that we should look at?
Well, there's migrants could be held at Manston for up to 4 days. There's mouldy
Is that 4-star hotel?
Yeah.
And how to detect Alzheimer's early. That's interesting. Have we done that? No. Anyway, the eye, Leo, with COVID jabs.
Yeah, and they've also got tributes to Fleetwood legend Christine McVie.
Yes.
I played Mick Fleetwood in an ITV drama.
Mick Fleetwood.
Mick Fleetwood.
Oh, Mick Fleetwood.
That was his accent. that was a microaggression. Everything you say is just muck. That was racism. That was pure racism.
Yeah, you've got to resign right now.
That'd be a great tribute act. Her name, because she was married to John McVie, right?
And they're all married to each other.
They're all married, I know,
First ever polycule.
But she carried his name. I think they were divorced by now, but she was married to him, and that's what the name of the band was, Mick Fleetwood and John McVie. They were, named after the rhythm section, unusually. Yeah. Which is of no relevance to her. She was pretty good, wasn't she?
She was brilliant.
Yeah, they were all
she had Songbird was my favourite song, which she wrote herself. Absolutely beautiful song.
Yeah. Sing it for us now, Nick.
I'll do it after. No, that's on the premium content. You have to, £5 a month.
She's 79, though. I mean, that is terrifying to me when people, you know, that I've just assumed are still pretty much in the ripeness of life turn out to be that bloody old.
Yeah.
I guess she was maybe a little bit older than Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham when they were
younger. I think Mick and her were the older.
With the original,
Well, it's a fascinating band because before that they used to be more of a bluesy band. At one point they had 3 guitarists. Yeah. They had one that was just a slide guitarist. That's how bluesy they were. Yeah. And then they became much more pop as they went on.
Peter Green, a lot of people say he was one of the greatest. I mean, he was a very strange. He did not cope. But anyway, listen.
Too many drugs.
Fleetwood Mac rabbit holes aside, let's talk about the COVID jab.
Yeah, talking about old people dying. So apparently the UK is playing with fire after the COVID jab's U-turn, scientists have warned. So apparently our planning around COVID isn't good enough. We've just sort of assumed, the government's assumed that COVID has gone away and maybe natural immunity is kicked in and taken over, so we don't have proper plans in place for new variants and rolling out vaccines and developing new vaccines.
Yeah, I think this is true. Kate Bingham's been warning about this for some time now, and she's not, like, financially benefiting from it. She's not
one of the few people in the news who isn't financially.
Exactly,
What's funny, though, is we did have a plan last time and we just threw it out the window completely and decided to lock everyone in their houses. That was never part of the plan.
No, that's right.
Do we even listen to plans? And we managed to still do the rollout anyway, so I'm not sure it's such a big deal. And also the vaccines, well, we can question their efficacy, but I don't know what we're allowed to say.
I think we really need new vaccines because I need new things not to take.
Exactly. I'd love more things not to take. But Greg Clark here, it's quite interesting. He says that I hesitate to use the word forgotten because it seems to be, and this is a mystery to me, it seems to have been deliberate. So it's funny that he's now the conspiracy theorist after we've had all the so-called anti-vaxxers. He's saying we've deliberately ruined our vaccine ban. That doesn't seem particularly likely to me. me.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous, and you're right. The conspiracy theory can turn on a pin. I mean, we've all noticed the way that they're reporting the lockdown protesters in China as a distinctly different flavour from the way that lockdown protesters in this country were described. But it does seem a bit silly to me. I don't entirely share your vaccine scepticism, but broadly speaking, we invested a lot of money and had, world-class life sciences. We had an edge. People thinking, oh, Britain, they do well with the vaccines and everything. They have kind of just allowed it to drizzle out the bottom of the bath plug, I think.
Because it's not a thing anymore.
Yeah.
Like, people are getting it, but it doesn't matter.
No, it wouldn't even have to be COVID. They could have just, rolled out vaccines for loads of stuff. It could have been a great British business,
other stuff?
I think. Other things that people need vaccinating
Like chlamydia.
Against. Yes, exactly.
Mpox.
Malaria, that's a big one.
Mpox.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what monkeypox is called now.
Mpox.
Mpox.
Oh, we're not allowed to call it monkeypox.
No.
They get Mpox. Mpox, isn't that? That was a... or M-people. And welcome back to Headliners with me, Simon Evans, and Leo Kirst and Nick Dixon. So we go to Thursday's Telegraph to kick off this section with Suella Braverman being complimented on her classical rhetorical style by the family.
Who wrote that? Suella Braverman's migrant speech, like rivers of blood, says senior Met officer. This is Neil Basu, who is worried about her choice of language. People have been very obsessed with the language over this and the language of invasion and so on.
Policing her language.
Yeah. So, and I think probably the actual thing happening is more important. But let's address this. So, firstly, I mean, Enoch Powell. Well, Enoch Powell he was a bit of a moderate lib when it came to the numbers. In hindsight, he sort of actually underestimated immigration. But whatever you say about Enoch Powell, everyone from Thatcher to Tony Benn to Tony Blair has said this guy was a genius in terms of IQ, spoke multiple languages. And I don't think anyone's really comparing Suella Braverman to him on that level.
And she's not as good.
She's not as smart as Enoch Powell. I think everyone would admit
Probably
that.
not as good a Houseman scholar, for instance.
Yeah, exactly. But the difference is, now he does talk about, well, he's saying that in the past his parents experienced attacks based on race because of things Enoch Powell has said, and that's a genuine question. Do things like that inflame tensions? And of course, obviously they do in some cases. You could cite the extremes, obviously Hitler. You could even cite modern things like Maxine Waters saying push back on Trump supporters, or the BLM riots being encouraged by the media. Certainly you can make the argument that inflammatory rhetoric can lead to violence. I could certainly accept that. But when you're comparing it to the current situation with Braverman, the key difference is she's tackling an illegal migrant problem that just about everyone has a problem with and says we need to tackle. It's not in any way near as incendiary. So I think it's a bit silly.
Well, the one thing that she said, which I do, and my views are roughly in line with yours, but she did say this quite bizarre thing that she dreamed of sending those crossing the channel illegally to Rwanda. Not that she thought it was an unfortunate but necessary deterrent or anything, but that she seemed to have some sort of a degree of glee in it, which I think was it
was odd language, but that again was where the IQ comes in, but also where this does the language matter that much? He's called it an invasion. Is that important? But this guy, let's just to finish on my bit, he does admit also to being woke. He says if he'll happily be called woke. So we can see that this guy, we know it's sort of side he's on, but I think it's a bit much comparing Braverman to Powell.
Yes.
Well, and also the language is important because she's making these great rhetorical gestures. I want to send them to Rwanda and all this kind of stuff, but she's not doing it, and the Tories aren't doing it. And they've been in power for 12 years, give or take, and they're not going to do it. What they do is they talk tough, like every government. Even Keir Starmer right now is saying, he's going to crack down on illegal immigration, and he's going to, and also limit legal migration so it doesn't impact, house prices, services, and wages and things like that. But he won't do it, and the Tories aren't doing it. The elites that run the country, they want mass immigration because it pushes house prices up. They own property. It provides cheap labour for their businesses. So
it's throwing
no
kindling
incentive
on the fire, isn't it? Essentially, it's not. It's not building it up with solid wood. It just keeps the flames burning a little bit brighter in the short term.
Yeah,
it does seem that there's been a total failure by year for about over 20 years now to tackle the issue.
But Suella will come out and say these incredible things, but which inflame some people and reassure others. But really, nothing is being done.
No. And I tend to agree with you that I think he's quite pleased to be regarded as woke, but he uses that term as it was sort of 6 years ago. It has been sort of, I suppose, watered down or distorted in its terms now.
Well, he says it's alert to issues of racial and social injustice, but that's not what woke
That's not what people think it means now, is it?
Sort of exploiting victimhood or exploiting these lever issues for your own social or financial gain.
And indeed, from a police perspective, it's about rebranding cars with rainbows and so on, isn't it? And all that kind of stuff. Anyway, he should be aware of that. Leo, the next story with Thursday's Telegraph, Just Stop Oil, not quite stopping traffic.
Yeah, well, Just Stop Oil marchers, they were marching in London and the police didn't stop them because they said they weren't obstructing the highway. So they made no arrests at the protest, but with one police officer saying they're walking down the highway and we're facilitating them.
Here they go.
This is the police actually helping Just Stop Oil block. I mean, they say they're not blocking it because they're moving, but I'm sorry, if I'm in an ambulance trying to get to hospital, I don't want to be moving at that speed. I don't want to be walking at the maximum speed a vegan can walk at. I want to be going at 60 miles an hour in an ambulance. So it's ridiculous. It just shows. One officer said they're not doing anything wrong at the minute. They're not obstructing the highway. It's still moving. I mean, are the police trolling us? Another police officer said the problem is the traffic can get past when the opportunity arises. It's a proper grey area. Look, we just had this policing bill passed that was supposed to allow the police to crack down on protests. And everybody was worried it was going to be, too authoritarian and allow them to crack down on things too harshly.
Yeah.
Why aren't they using it? And in the one instance where it would actually be a good idea, where these people are disrupting everybody's lives, and they're saying they're going to continue doing it, and they're also going to continue damaging artwork. They say they're going to slash artwork now, which is moving on from just splashing soup on it.
Well, so far, most of the artwork they've splashed has actually a glass in front of it. No damage has been done at all, but perhaps they feel that's lessened the impact. Go on, Nick.
Well, that's just stage one. Yeah, well, it says here they're walking down the highway and we're facilitating them. And that's the perfect word and perfect image, because they're facilitating them because the establishment secretly, or not so secretly, agrees with these people. But this is why I say we should designate them as terrorists. I mean, this guy, de Koning, who's their spokesman, has said here quite clearly that he's warned that they'll continue to escalate unless the government meets our demand. I mean, doesn't that sound a bit terroristy to you? Or whatever word we use, but certainly that's, surely that we can...
I think we should designate them as racist. Then something will get done. Then they'll have to be fired from their jobs.
Well, this next story, Nick, from Thursday's Sun, may actually explain why they're not so keen to arrest them.
Yeah, UK jails are full and taxpayers will need to pay £400 a night for every police cell to house violent cons. So obviously this is going to wind people up. So last week there were 82,839 inmates locked up in England and Wales. The total number is understood to have now topped 83,000. Around 1,500 extra cons were banged up in the past 2 months alone. So, yeah, it's this problem we've got. The prisons are full. It's yet another thing that's falling apart in our country. They're blaming the pandemic delay and the barrister strike action. It's another thing that perhaps we could solve if there were less people in the country, or maybe bring back the death penalty. I don't know. Just was another one idea. Oh, yeah, you're right. I should be put in prison for that.
The thing with this is so many of these people, especially the sort of new rise in prisoners, is from prisoners on remand. So they're waiting for trial. So these could be innocent people, and this is because barristers haven't been processing the cases because this backlog and because the...
I mean, I remember this kind of story cropping up back in the 80s. I did a law degree. It was one of the main things we did then about criminology, that the prisons weren't adequate then. I don't know whether they built more. I mean, those Nightingale hospitals they knocked up pretty quickly, didn't they? Maybe they could have been repurposed.
China can build them quickly.
We build like huge big cells with very old-fashioned kind of architecture for these, but all they really need is the old ball and chain. Put them under house arrest with a 50-kilo weight around the ankle, and that will stop. They won't be going anywhere. I will say,
house arrest. Put them in a field.
Yes, exactly. Field. I spent the night in a police cell about 30 years ago. I think it must have been now. Drunk and disorderly in Covent Garden. And if I'd known it was 400 quid a night, I would have been quite chuffed, because that was,
Well, Covent Garden as well, it probably would cost.
Did not get 400 quid's worth of facilities, from what I remember. There wasn't even a proper Lucy.
Yeah, that prison food, the stuff you get in the jail cells where they just, not the proper prison, but that stuff, it lasts, where it's like MREs from the Iraq War.
Have you all been to prison then? Because it's sounding like
it's all coming out now. Nick is the only one with a clean record. It's basically like the Dirty Dozen, this whole channel. Thursday's Guardian now. We used to regard foreign water with suspicion. Now it's coming out of our taps, Leo, it seems.
Yeah, well, apparently more than 70% of the English water industry is in foreign ownership. I thought it tasted funny. So foreign investment firms, private equity, pension funds and businesses lodged in tax havens own more than 70% of the water industry. In England, according to research by The Guardian, the Guardian, lefties are saying this is bad, but surely this is just diversity in business ownership. Which
it's funny how if you find out that 70% of London, or 65% of London is now foreign occupied.
Yeah.
That was yesterday's news, and that was people sort of like, so what? But this is front page story. That actually, who owns the shares?
You've got to approve of this, or you're an evil Nazi racist. But yeah, Northumbrian Water, which supplies nearly 3 million people in North East England, is ultimately owned by the Cayman Islands registered C.K. Hutchinson Holdings, the business empire of Li Ka-shing, Hong Kong's richest individual. He's got a great name for being rich.
Li Ka-shing. I do think the simulation is increasingly just taking the Michael. I noticed there BlackRock have got 10% of it as well. They seem to be the
one for the conspiracy theorists there.
Water that's been through a black rock.
Yeah, perfect filtration system.
It is disturbing, isn't it? This could almost make me a lefty and say let's nationalise water, because you find out, I mean, China owns 8.7% of Thames Water, and Qatar owns another bit of something, and Abu Dhabi.
But how much of the Yangtze do we own? That's what.
Good question. And the US owns most of it, 17% overall. So it does give you a weird feeling. This is the thing about globalism, isn't it? It's all well and good while things are working. Then suddenly Putin has a war and your gas prices change. Someone else has got all your water.
Yeah.
It's a bit disturbing, isn't it? I mean, and you think about The Big Short when Michael Burry says it says at the end he's investing now solely in water. The guy that predicted the 2008 crash.
Right.
You sort of think if something happened with water, I wouldn't mind owning some of it in our country,
in our hands. And also, it's not a free market. It doesn't really suit privatisation because to change your water supplier, you've got to move house.
Yeah, it's a nonsense, isn't it? Like trains and the rest. And I do remember, I'm old enough to remember, I actually worked on some of those flotations when Thatcher privatised the great nationalised industries. And we always, the propaganda was everyone's going to own a little bit of gas, a little bit of electricity. Within weeks, everyone had flogged them off at a short profit. And they were all owned by France. And I remember British Gas was France almost immediately.
And as it says here, the ownership structure is so complex that it's so opaque and no one can figure out who actually owns some of it.
Well, that's all for part 2. After the break, we have the virtues of private schools, Ronaldo's bumper contract offer, and Leo will be pondering which one of these would get the hump.
I remember her.
Or will it be number 2? We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Foxy for camel.
Let's go to Thursday's Mirror now. Private schools attended by senior Tories have avoided paying VAT, as indeed have all other private schools not attended by senior Tories, because private schools don't pay, but that's not how they want to set it.
Yeah, and it's upsetting Labour. So Keir Starmer told the Prime Minister to end the Tory scandal of massive tax breaks for private schools, which are able to escape paying VAT on their fees due to their charitable status. Apparently, this top private schools avoided charging £65 million in VAT on their fees last year due to being charities. But people who send their kids to private school have paid for a state education, because they pay tax, they pay income tax and all the other myriad taxes we pay, and pay a lot of it as well, because they tend to be rich. They're supporting the nation. And then they don't even use the state education that they've paid for. They've paid for a place in a state school, they're not even using it, and they pay even more for a place in a private school. So really, they are being a charity. They're supporting state kids, and they're not even being a burden on the state.
I mean, some people have, some serious people have posited a different system, more like the sort of continental health systems a little bit, a sort of voucher-based system. So you get a certain amount of support from the state. Every time you have a child, they might say, oh, well, it will cost the state $4,000 a year to educate that child. So we'll either give you $4,000 a year voucher, you can spend that and get a free education in a state school, or there'll be other schools which offer an education for $12,000 a year, and your $4,000 will go towards it. You see what I mean?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So that would give a lot more money to rich people.
Yeah, and it might also create, which I think would be useful and valuable, a sort of middle tier. You know, something closer to the old grammar schools, I suppose. You know, instead of being either eye-wateringly expensive or
free and rubbish,
or like a little bit of a postcode lottery. Well, there are some good ones, but you just don't know, and they can go off the boil very quickly if the wrong head sort of comes in or something. You know. And of course, the other thing that is worth mentioning in this story is that private education now is a big export business in this country, especially at sixth form. An awful lot of foreign students, especially East Asian at the moment. The British education system has a very high reputation in China and Korea and so on.
Is that
There's a lot of new money. I think it has pushed prices up, and a lot of the best and most famous schools are opening branches and offering e-schooling basically and all these sort of things. It's a big export business.
We went to web schools.
Yeah, I certainly did. This seems more like a tax raid to me than an attempt to do anything serious for education. You're just trying to get some money from the richest people, which is fine, but surely this will hit those relatively less well-off people who can go to private schools, and then they'd have to move into other kinds of education, and the rishis will still be able to pay for it, seems to me anyway. I mean, yeah, you mentioned grammar schools. That's what was the real problem. We got rid of grammar schools, and now, you know, they're sort of pointing out all these top Tories have been to private schools, and of course they have, because we got rid of grammar schools, and the one person that hadn't, the one person that had been to a comp was Liz Truss, and look what they did to her. Didn't last very long, did it?
Very true. Thursday's Guardian now, Nick. It seems that the super rich and I have yet another thing in common, a deep distrust of the charity sector.
Yes, the UK super rich, less charitable than a decade ago, says charity chief. So, yeah, the idea is that this is from Orlando Fraser, and he's saying that incomes have grown by 10% in real terms amongst the top 1% from 2011 to 2019, and yet the typical donation has fallen by a fifth to just £48 a month. And he kind of looks at why, and then he interestingly points out that even in the top 1%, the generosity of the top 20% is far higher, which is kind of the Pareto principle in action. 80% of the top 1% are not contributing meaningfully, so it's kind of that.
So it's inevitable. I spotted that Pareto principle, which go ahead and explain.
Well, yeah, you've got the Pareto distribution, which is sort of where all the resources tend to end up with, like the 1% or whatever. Then you've got the Pareto principle, which states that 80% of results come from 20% of actions, or things like that.
And it's sort of inevitable. So he's observed something happening that has probably happened across all times and across all sectors. That 80% of the donations are coming from 20%.
Yeah. Although within that, still in general the 1% are giving less. I wonder if it tracks with the declining Christianity, which has been in the news lately. You know, people are just getting less generous, or are people worried that they'll need the money for the coming economic crash or recession? Or I'm not sure. That's speculation.
I mean, if it's the super rich, you can assume that they probably that they're not too worried about not having that much money. Maybe it is one of those things where it needs to become, what do they call it, like a visible, like a virtue signalling kind of thing.
Well, that's what they used to do. The rich used to have these big gala dinners and all the rest of it, where they could parade the fact that they're giving to charity. But now that's seen as gauche. So maybe we need to bring that back. But the Guardian is sort of saying that super rich people are becoming less charitable. I think it's more of a reflection on the charities. Charities are becoming awful. I used to give to Amnesty International. For decades I've given to Amnesty International. And I stopped because they became an awful charity. They were criticising Ukraine, they were criticising Alexei Navalny, they were supporting Just Stop Oil, even though, you know, Just Stop Oil were silencing artists by covering up their artworks.
There's a very interesting writer called Ed West, I recommend his Substack, and he wrote a piece about this, about how charities all seem to drift leftwards really definitively.
Well, that's the Robert Conquest theory again, isn't it? The second law.
And they in particular seem to be, he was saying, like, there should probably be a lifetime, like a 20-year span, and then they get taken over by the government, you know, something like that, because they can become really anathema to most people who are wealthy and their tastes. Anyway, Nick, over to you now for Thursday's Metro. It seems the BBC are struggling to connect with lower income audiences.
No, that can't be true.
It's not like what we are, is it?
BBC urged by Ofcom to do more to connect with lower income audiences, and I love Ofcom, can I just say that quickly, to get that out of the way. Yeah, of course, I mean, the BBC makes stuff for North London lefties like them. You know, they've got a huge chunk of the population, Middle England, whatever you want to call it, Brexit voters, whoever, that they basically don't like, and they've not really made a serious effort to be neutral. I mean, they did just a story very recently on the midterm elections. It was interviewing election denier Carrie Lake and all this kind of stuff. People get a bit sick of this. You could cite endless examples. And they've ignored warnings like this before, because Ofcom have said in the past, look, your comedy output doesn't match the rest of your output, and they've just gone, yeah, it does, it's great. But here they do sound like they're actually trying to address it, because it's found that people from lower socioeconomic groups are less engaged than the rest of the population, less satisfied with their portrayal in programmes, and they disagree with statements like the BBC provides a broad mix of content and things like that. So the BBC are actually worried about this, and it's not quite clear what they're going to do yet, but it seems they are trying to address it at least.
The BBC don't do enough to actually employ people from lower income brackets. I mean, I appeared on Radio 4 talking for an hour about the online safety bill. So it was, pretty serious stuff that you got to have some sort of expertise. I got paid 50 quid. And when I said, why am I only getting paid 50 quid? They said, we don't want to influence, we don't want to provide any bias. I'm like, this is making me biased.
Well,
And also I bet the producer was getting a decent salary. The woman who, books the taxis and everything, getting a decent
you're
salary.
absolutely right. A lot of people say that is the big blind spot of the BBC. They're very keen on ensuring that there is diversity of race and gender and sexuality and so on, but actually class is, ironically, the one that lies at the bottom of it all.
Can I just add to your anecdote? I did Sunday Morning Live. They're meant to give you 100 quid, gave me nothing, several follow-up emails. I just gave up in the end. I was like, these are like a bad comedy booker.
I'll buy that debt off you.
And they didn't know taxis either. I got the tube both ways. So I'd actually worse than you out of the BBC.
More from Thursday's Guardian now. It's just back to Leo. We have a crypto billionaire, Bankman Fried, who is more cryptic with his political donations, it seems.
Yeah, so this crypto billionaire, remember a couple of weeks ago, this FTX exchange and trading house went down, and up to $20 billion is just sort of vaporised and vanished. And also he was giving money. He donated millions, like $40 million to the Democrats right before the midterm elections. And then this whole thing collapsed afterwards. Well, now he's come out and he said he funneled dark money to the Republicans. So this is money that wasn't publicly announced as a political donation.
Because it would have been bad PR for him, right?
That's what he says. He says the reason was not for regulatory reasons. It's because reporters freak the F out if you donate to Republicans. They're all super liberal, and I didn't want to have that fight. Yeah, well, none of us do.
I mean, he has been quite bracingly honest, actually, after the event, hasn't he?
I'm not sure about this. I want to see some receipts, because this was this is very harmful to the Democrats to have this money that had basically been fraudulently obtained, then siphoned into their pockets.
But he was on record. I did read a bit in one interview where he was just going, "Oh yeah, all that woke crap. That's just something we say. We don't really believe."
Yeah, I saw that.
He has been.
That's all woke people. That's what they all believe. Nobody actually believes this nonsense. It's like being in communist Russia.
Away from the World Cup now, Thursday's Mail has news of a more traditional Qatari competition.
Yeah, so forget the football. Qatar is also hosting the Camel Beauty World Cup.
I think we've got some pictures.
Yeah. I mean, I thought this is racist, but it's actually true.
Oh, we haven't.
So the event takes place at the Qatar Camel Mazayan Club in Ash Shahaniya. Ahead of the winner of the day's competing category, other female camels were milked, and the owner of the one producing the most milk was rewarded with 20,000 Qatari riyals, which is about $5,500.
She does look like she's wearing a wig.
Is that the actual? That's not the most beautiful camel. That's just a random picture of a camel from the internet, isn't it?
They do have lovely eyes, though, don't they?
And if it's like human beauty pageants, it's probably going to be won by a trans camel, a horse, with a hump strapped to its back.
Did you notice this bit? The bronze winner said, "I can't describe my feelings because this female has an audience like the audience of the World Cup, like Real Madrid or Manchester United names two club teams." So that was a bit off. But I do like this Camel World Cup because it probably has less virtue signaling. There's less kneeling. There's no VAR. There's no Lineker or Neville to put up with, right?
They kneel to get on the ground.
That's true. Yeah, they do. They take the knee. Camels. It is. It's a bit off, I think, having a beauty parade in which the contestants also get milked.
I'd like to see that in human ones.
Well, that's it for part 3. I think we're through now. Yes, we've got coming up. Love Actually's sickening lack of diversity, fake boyfriends for hire, and would Nick and Leo be more successful if they wore crop tops? I think maybe so. We'll see you in a couple of minutes. Right, welcome back to Headliners. Let's get back to it. We've got a final stack to get through. Thursday's Guardian, and they are banging on about what else? Diversity, actually. Yeah,
Richard Curtis says lack of diversity in Love Actually makes me feel a bit stupid, and he's certainly right about the last part because this is a film from 2003. Now, everyone's now saying it's not diverse enough. But of course, in 1997 with Blair is when immigration spiked massively in the country. So 2003 was a very different country. It just wasn't as diverse. So you represented the country as it was at the time. But it's like 1984 now. We have to go back and say, no, London was always this diverse. And we have to pretend that there was no past. And there's been all these bizarre hit pieces against it in the media. One person said it was like a UKIP ethno-state. And it's mad. I mean, Richard Curtis has said, thank God society is changing. My film is bound in some moments to feel out of date. The lack of diversity makes me feel uncomfortable and a bit stupid. Why? Why do you have to... Why?
Yeah. There's an Irish dad in there.
Well, there you go.
Liam Neeson's in it.
Yeah. I actually haven't seen it, full confession, but I actually will watch it after this. I mean, look, if you make a movie...
There is definitely a lack of diversity. They are all Richard Curtis characters. You know what I mean? You know, they are drawn from that very...
But if you make a movie pre-2001, the Twin Towers will still be up. You don't go, I'm filled with shame because the Twin Towers are... It's just how things were then. Now things are different.
Funny enough, that was where it came from. The title Love, actually, and that was it was a rebuke to the idea that there is, you know, that there's so much irresolvable hatred in the world.
Yeah.
Right.
Can I say one last thing?
We've got to retract that love because of wokeness.
And it came from an era when a movie was just a movie. You were trying to make a good movie. You weren't just trying to lecture people about politics.
Well, yeah, and I think of all the issues in the film to pick on, it wouldn't be the lack of diversity, it would be the fact that it glorifies stalking. Walking dead, turning up on a doorstep. I mean, somebody should have phoned the police.
Yeah, that was true. He also made Notting Hill, I think earlier than that, where that really was a diverse neighbourhood of which you saw no examples whatsoever. So if he wants to talk about a film in which
more self-flagellation, please, Richard.
Over to Thursday's Times there. What is the latest in student union tyranny in the home of despotic authoritarian overreach?
So a couple of weeks ago, Stirling University Student Union decided to ban meat on campus. I went to Stirling University. To be honest, they need some B vitamins, the students there. But the students who actually led the ban have now been subjected to verbal abuse. So two of them have been called names or whatever. And one student, Imogen Maitland...
Oh, you can't make it up, can you?
It's like, it was either this or just stop oil for her. You know what I mean? So she also found a note pinned to the door of their, she's obviously non-binary as well, their privately rented accommodation in Stirling. The note read, "Dear vegans, please stop forcing veganism on the uni. I don't force eating a £30 McDonald's order of Big Tasties and wrap of the day on you. I assume you also wouldn't appreciate if I made you eat an all-meat diet, so don't force a zero-meat diet on us."
That doesn't sound like abuse to me. In fact, that sounds extraordinarily polite.
Sounds like reason.
Yeah, that sounds
good advice.
I mean, look, these are students who have not developed prefrontal cortexes, which they say comes in around 25. They're not rational, and they're forcing other people to eat their diet, which has been proved to be not healthy. They're going to get no testosterone. They're going to gradually become even more left-wing and soy-based, and it's not healthy, and you can't force your diet.
And it wasn't on a very significant... I mean, it was 55%. I know people will say, well, it's more than Brexit, but, you know, if you're going to force people to actually change their diet, I think it feels like it should be an overwhelming...
People cared about Brexit, so they came out and voted. This is just some... Like, when I was at university, I didn't go and vote in anything. I didn't even know you could vote in student union stuff.
But wouldn't this stop you going to Stirling if you were thinking about it?
No, what would stop me going to Stirling is that it's a terrible university. I wish I'd known that before I went. Apologies to any of my former professors.
Well, you've overcome your early stalling and obstacles, and here you are. You've risen to broadcast TV. You know,
it was all that
probably have your face on. Is probably one of those of the alumni they have up in the student union now.
No, they have loads of other people, but
who's the most famous Stirling?
Ian M. Banks.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I can see why you didn't make the wall.
Because he's got two pen names as well. That would cover most of it. Mirror Online now, and sounds like this could be a new income stream for you. Nick possibly posing as acceptable boyfriend material for women who are embarrassed about their real ones.
That's going to HR. Woman dating a man 20 years older considers hiring a fake boyfriend to fool her parents. This is an 18-year-old woman. She talks about a couple of states away, so inevitably it must be America. But, yeah, she met a 40-year-old man, but she didn't want to tell her parents, so she's thinking about hiring an actor to pose as a fake boyfriend. But she says, but that seems a little crazy. So there's some self-awareness there. And she told him he was 22 and showed him a picture of some random guy. She seems kind of funny to me. Yeah. And look, the reality is, I'm not going to go out with an 18-year-old before I get emails, but... You know, really, in the reality, but I'm prefacing it with that. But the reality is, Men, often older men do go out with young women because men have to acquire like some sort of status and success.
Yeah.
Women famously don't want no scrubs, and that's just how it goes. It takes a little time. Now that's frowned upon in society and called creepy, but really isn't it just fairly normal? And maybe not this extreme gap, but...
I don't know exactly how it all started, but with the internet dating being the sort of prevalent mode now in which people meet one another, it feels more likely to me, if anything, that you might end up with somebody who's with an age gap, but you've created a rapport before you met.
Who's catfished you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they met online, as you say.
Probably just journalists who still got their previous, their photo above the byline. A lot of people now in public life, when you see the image of them and then you actually meet them, I mean...
Yeah, people say I'm better looking in person even, but that's very rare. Sorry, Leo, did you want to say something? Oh,
no, I was just going to say, I mean, it's borderline a bit creepy, like a 40-year-old going out with an 18-year-old.
That is a bit too much, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Big tip. At last, Leo, we get on to Thursday Star now. The burning issue of the day: should women dress like strippers at work? Depends if they're strippers, I guess. But outside of that,
well, earlier this month, the New York Times took to Twitter to ask people whether they deemed it appropriate for crop tops to be worn in the workplace. I think they're the tops that stop and show a bit of belly.
Yeah,
is that right? So they're kind of fun, kind of Spice Girlsy.
Yeah,
and it's left people divided. I mean, this is basically the journalist couldn't be bothered writing an article, so he's got some tweets and written them down. Copied and pasted them.
Yeah.
And it's a nonsense. So some people say it's all right, some people say it isn't. I mean,
I think it probably genuinely is an issue for the company to resolve.
Yeah.
You say?
Leo was saying before the show all women should wear them at work, but yeah, people. It says here people claimed women shouldn't wear crop tops to work because they're hired for their brains. It does depend on the job, doesn't it? Not at Hooters, presumably. You know what I mean? I'm sure many are, but. I don't know, I don't want to diss
A lot of
Hooters.
people are hired simply for their sort of biddability, for their domestication, aren't they? Just for behaving appropriately.
Company men and women.
Speaking of which, Nick, finally we got our last story of the day, quantum wormholes. This is in Thursday's Independent. I'm sure you can adequately explain what's going on here.
Yeah, this is my expert area. Physicists create holographic wormhole inside quantum computers. So scientists have created a holographic wormhole inside a quantum computer for the first time. Oh, good. The wormhole is theoretical, by the way. They didn't make an actual rupture in space and time, so don't worry about that. Okay. And basically, if you don't know, of course, wormholes famously are bridges across space-time, which connect to otherwise remote parts of the cosmos, Simon.
Yes.
So they've done that, but in a simulation form.
I remember wormholes from
Donnie Darko.
Douglas Adams and all that sort of thing. What were you...
I said Donnie Darko, different frame of
they're
reference.
all these, from science fiction. So they really do exist, they think, but they've never actually found one, have they?
They're theoretical.
To pass a worm through
theoretical
them.
holographic ones exist in quantum computers. I mean, how many more words for stuff that doesn't exist can you get in there?
But quantum computers do exist now. They are happening, right? I think they really do exist.
Right. I created one in my hologram. It's a wormhole.
In a sort of shoebox with a hole at one end. I don't understand how even quantum mechanics is like, that's probability, right? You understand? We do understand that. That's the idea that things aren't. How have they managed to make computers out of that? I mean, what does he say? It's probably, this is, when you're going to do your taxes and go out, it's probably about 500 quid.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Apparently quantum computers can arrive at can solve an equation, which is what computers do, basically.
Yeah.
They solve it incredibly quickly because they're not going through each step of the process, they're just doing it all at once and coming to it. But then it's not, it's not absolutely accurate all of the time because quantum particles they exist in a state of flux. They can exist in two places at once.
But they have done teleportation, right? That is in there.
That's coming up.
Teleportation does happen. That does happen now. Quantum teleportation.
Quantum teleportation. Theoretically.
No, real. Actually,
real.
That's actually happened in the real world, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, do it with a cheese sandwich. Then I'll be impressed.
I think we've sorted that out. That's all for tonight, folks. Thank you to my guests, Leo and Nick. Tune in at the same time tomorrow. Andrew Doyle will be in this seat. He'll be joined by Leo Kearse and Josh Howie, the one relatively tame lefty we allow on the channel. It's been a pleasure. See you. Good night.